There is a peculiar kind of freedom that arrives not when you finally get what you want, but when you stop wanting it with the desperation that has defined your entire life. You have felt this freedom before, though you may not have recognized it. It came in the moment after you decided to quit the job you hated, before you had any plan for what came next. It came when you finally stopped texting back the person who only ever reached out when they needed something. It came when you looked at the life you were supposed to want and realized with a clarity that felt almost violent that you did not want it at all. Michel de Montaigne understood this freedom better than almost anyone who has ever written. In the 16th century, in a tower in southwestern France, he withdrew from public life and began to write essays that would change everything we think about what it means to be a self. He was not a philosopher in the traditional sense. He did not build systems. He did not claim to have found the truth. He simply observed his own mind with a candor that still shocks, and in that observation he discovered something that contradicts almost every piece of modern advice about success, happiness, and purpose. The more you care about outcomes, the more outcomes control you. And the moment you stop caring, not in the sense of apathy, but in the sense of release, everything begins to fall into place. This is not a motivational speech. Montaigne would have hated motivational speeches. He would have seen them as another form of the anxiety they pretend to cure, another way of making people care more intensely about things that do not matter. What follows is an invitation to a different way of being, one that Montaigne practiced and documented with the precision of a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. The tyranny of caring. You have been taught to care intensely about everything. Your grades, your job title, your body, your social media presence, your productivity, your personal brand, your mental health, which you are supposed to optimize with the same fervor you apply to your career. The modern world runs on caring. It monetizes your attention, your anxiety, your desperate need to be seen as successful, happy, and well-adjusted. The algorithms are designed to make you care more than is rational about things that matter less than you think. Montaigne lived in a different world, but he recognized the same dynamic. In his essay of Solitude, he describes how people are tossed about incessantly by their desires, their fears, their need for external validation. He watched men ruin their health pursuing wealth, ruin their peace pursuing honor, ruin their lives pursuing a reputation that would mean nothing to them once they were dead. And he asked a question that most people never ask. What if the problem is not that we are failing to get what we want, but that we want the wrong things with the wrong intensity? The tyranny of caring is that it makes you a slave to outcomes you cannot control. You care about whether people like you, and so you perform a version of yourself that is not real. You care about whether you succeed, and so you avoid the risks that might lead to genuine growth. You care about your image, and so you curate your life until it becomes a museum of poses rather than a field of experience. Montaigne saw this clearly. We are never present with, but always beyond ourselves. Fear, desire, and hope are always pushing us toward the future and depriving us of the sense and consideration of what is. This is the first and most difficult truth. When you are always caring about what comes next, you are never actually here. Your body is in the room, but your mind is in the future, rehearsing disasters or fantasizing triumphs. And because the future never arrives, it is always becoming the present, which immediately becomes the past. You are never actually living. You are always preparing to live, always caring about a life that is perpetually deferred. Montaigne's response to this tyranny was radical in its simplicity. Stop caring so much. Not about everything. Not in the nihilistic sense of giving up on life, but about the things that do not deserve the intensity you bring to them. About the opinions of people whose judgment you do not respect. About the outcomes that are not in your control. About the version of yourself that exists only in other people's minds and in your own anxious projections. This is easier said than done, of course. The habit of caring is deeply ingrained. It is reinforced by every social structure you inhabit, by every message you receive, by every comparison you make between your life and the lives you see curated online. But Montaigne offers something more valuable than a technique for caring less. He offers a philosophy of being that makes caring less seem not like a loss, but like a gain. The art of nonchalance. Montaigne called it nonchalance. The word has been misunderstood in English as laziness or indifference, but in Montaigne's French it carried a specific meaning, a lightness of being, a freedom from the heaviness of excessive concern. The nonchalant person is not apathetic. They are simply not weighed down by the gravity of their own expectations. Think about the moments in your life when things have actually gone well. The conversation that flowed naturally, the creative work that seemed to arrive fully formed, the relationship that deepened without effort. In each of these moments, you were not trying. You were not caring with the intensity that normally defines your engagement with the world. You were present, attentive, responsive, but you were not grasping. You were not demanding a specific outcome. You were, in Montaigne's sense, nonchalant. This is the paradox that Montaigne spent his life exploring. The more you care about achieving something, the less likely you are to achieve it. The more you try to be happy, the more unhappy you become. The more you try to be interesting, the more boring you are. The more you try to be loved, the more unlovable you seem. Caring, when it becomes desperate, creates the very conditions of its own frustration. Montaigne observed this in himself. He was a successful man by any standard, a nobleman, a mayor, an advisor to kings. But he was not attached to these roles. When he withdrew to his tower to write, he did not do so as a rejection of the world, but as an embrace of something more fundamental, his own mind, his own experience, his own way of being that did not depend on external validation. "The greatest thing in the world," he wrote, "is to know how to belong to oneself. This belonging is the foundation of nonchalance. When you belong to yourself, you are not constantly seeking belonging elsewhere. You are not performing for approval, competing for status, or measuring your worth against arbitrary benchmarks. You are simply living, with the lightness of someone who knows that their value does not depend on what they achieve or what others think of them." The art of nonchalance is not something you acquire through effort. It is something you recover through release. You already know how to be nonchalant. You were born knowing. Watch a child at play, completely absorbed in the moment, indifferent to outcomes, caring only about the experience itself. This is the natural condition of human consciousness before it is trained to care about the future, about comparison, about the endless accumulation of symbols that we mistake for meaning. Montaigne's essays are an attempt to return to this natural condition, not by denying adulthood, but by refusing to let adulthood become a prison of seriousness. He writes about his kidney stones with the same curiosity he brings to ancient philosophy. He describes his own ignorance with the same pride others might bring to their knowledge. He is serious about not being serious, and in that paradox he finds a freedom that is unavailable to those who are always trying to get somewhere. The wisdom of the body. One of Montaigne's most radical insights was that the body knows things the mind cannot access. While philosophers before and after him treated the body as a distraction from pure thought, Montaigne trusted his body as a source of wisdom. He paid attention to his digestion, his sleep, his sexual desires, his physical sensations of comfort and discomfort. He understood that the mind's obsessive caring often conflicts with the body's deeper intelligence. You have experienced this conflict. You have stayed up late caring about a problem that your body knew was not worth the lost sleep. You have eaten poorly while caring about work that your body recognized as meaningless. You have pushed through exhaustion, ignored pain, suppressed instinct, all because your mind was convinced that caring more intensely would somehow produce better results. Montaigne would have found this absurd. In his essay of Experience, he argues that the body has its own logic, its own rhythm, its own way of knowing what is good for us. The mind, with its abstract categories and its future-oriented anxiety, often overrides this wisdom. We think ourselves into misery. We care ourselves into illness. We analyze ourselves into paralysis. And all the while, the body is sending signals that we refuse to hear. The wisdom of the body is nonchalant by nature. The body does not care about your 5-year plan. It cares about whether you are breathing well, eating well, moving well, resting well. It lives in the present because it has no other choice. The mind can wander into the future and the past, but the body is always here, always now, always responding to what is actually happening rather than what might happen. Montaigne's trust in the body was not anti-intellectual. He was one of the most educated men of his age, fluent in Latin from childhood, steeped in classical literature. But he refused to let his education override his experience. He refused to let his mind bully his body into submission. And in this refusal, he found a balance that is rare in philosophical tradition. The integration of thought and sensation, of reflection and instinct. When you stop caring so much about what your mind demands, you begin to hear what your body knows. You begin to notice when you are actually tired, actually hungry, actually drawn towards something or repelled by it. You begin to make decisions not from abstract principle, but from embodied wisdom. And these decisions, paradoxically, tend to work out better than the ones you agonize over. This is part of what Montaigne meant when he said that everything falls into place when you stop caring. The place things fall into is not the place your mind designed. It is the place your body recognizes as right. It is the life that fits you, rather than the life you are trying to fit yourself into. The futility of control. The deepest source of our caring is the illusion of control. We care intensely because we believe, against all evidence, that our caring makes a difference to outcomes. If we just worry enough, plan enough, optimize enough, we can bend the future to our will. This belief is so fundamental to modern life that questioning it feels like heresy. Montaigne questioned it constantly. He lived through a period of intense political instability. The French wars of religion, in which Catholics and Protestants slaughtered each other with a brutality that made a mockery of all human plans. He watched friends rise and fall, fortunes accumulate and dissipate, lives end suddenly and senselessly, and he concluded that the human belief in control was not just mistaken, but dangerous. It made people cruel in their certainty, anxious in their ambition, and devastated when reality inevitably disappointed them. In his essay, That to Philosophize is to Learn to Die, Montaigne confronts the ultimate loss of control: death. He does not offer comfort in the traditional sense. He does not promise an afterlife or a meaning that transcends mortality. He simply observes that our fear of death is largely a fear of losing control, and that this fear makes us miserable long before death arrives. If you have learned how to live, he writes, you have learned how to die. And learning how to live, for Montaigne, means learning to let go. The futility of control is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for relief. If you cannot control outcomes, you are released from the burden of trying. If the future is genuinely uncertain, your obsessive planning is not preparation but delusion. If death is inevitable, your terror is not wisdom but wasted energy. Montaigne does not say these things to depress you. He says them to free you. When you stop caring about controlling the uncontrollable, you discover that there was never anything to control in the first place. The universe was not waiting for your management. Your life was not a project that required your constant intervention. Things were happening, you were participating, and your belief that you were in charge was the source of most of your suffering. This is not passivity. Montaigne was not a passive man. He was actively engaged in the world, in his writing, in his relationships. But his engagement was not driven by the need to control. It was driven by curiosity, by pleasure, by the simple fact of being alive. He participated without attachment, acted without expectation, and accepted the results with the equanimity of someone who never believed he was entitled to a specific outcome. The things that fall into place when you stop caring are not the things you were trying to arrange. They are the things that were already possible, already present, already waiting for you to stop interfering long enough for them to emerge. The relationship that works because you stopped performing. The work that succeeds because you stopped forcing. The happiness that arrives because you stopped chasing it. The self as fluid. One of Montaigne's most enduring contributions to philosophy is his conception of the self as something fluid rather than fixed. He did not believe in a stable, essential identity that could be discovered and defended. He believed that the self is constantly changing, constantly becoming, and that our suffering comes largely from our refusal to accept this fluidity. You have a narrative about who you are. You are the responsible one, or the creative one, or the one who overcame adversity, or the one who is destined for greatness. This narrative is not false exactly, but it is incomplete. It is a snapshot of a moving target, a frame extracted from a film that never stops rolling. And when you care too much about maintaining this narrative, you become rigid. You reject experiences that do not fit. You avoid risks that might disrupt your story. You sacrifice your actual changing self to the demands of an imaginary fixed one. Montaigne's essays are a record of this fluidity. He writes about himself in the third person sometimes, as if observing a stranger. He contradicts himself from one essay to the next. He changes his mind, admits his ignorance, celebrates his inconsistencies. I am myself, the matter of my book, he declares, and the self he presents is not a monument, but a river. This fluidity is the foundation of his nonchalance. If you do not have a fixed self to defend, you do not need to care so much about how you are perceived. If you are not committed to a specific identity, you are free to change, to fail, to surprise yourself. The pressure to be consistent, to be authentic, to be true to some essential nature, all of this dissolves when you accept that there is no essential nature to be true to. The modern obsession with authenticity is, in Montaigne's view, just another form of caring too much. It demands that you discover your true self and live in accordance with it, as if the self were a buried treasure rather than a continuous creation. But the self is not discovered. It is composed, moment by moment, in the act of living. And the composition is never finished. When you stop caring about being a specific kind of person, you become free to be whatever the moment requires. You are not betraying yourself when you change. You are being yourself in the only way that is possible, by allowing yourself to flow. The things that fall into place do not fall into a pre-designed structure. They fall into the open space that appears when you stop trying to build. The company of oneself. Montaigne spent much of his life alone, and he came to value solitude not as a deprivation, but as a fulfillment. In his tower, surrounded by his books, he discovered that the best company was his own, not because he was narcissistic, but because he had learned to be interesting to himself. This is a rare achievement. Most people find their own company unbearable. They fill every silence with noise, every empty moment with distraction, every pause with the desperate search for external stimulation. They cannot be alone because they have not developed the inner resources that make solitude rich. And so they remain dependent on others, on activities, on the constant flow of input that prevents them from facing the emptiness they fear. Montaigne's emptiness was not frightening because he had filled it with himself. He had spent so much time observing his own mind, exploring his own thoughts, following his own curiosity, that his interior life was as varied and engaging as any social world. He did not need others to validate him because he had learned to validate himself. He did not need external events to entertain him because his own consciousness was endlessly entertaining. This self-sufficiency is the ultimate form of not caring. When you are sufficient unto yourself, you do not need others to be a certain way. You do not need events to unfold according to plan. You do not need the world to provide you with meaning, because you are already generating it internally. The person who enjoys their own company is immune to the manipulations of those who would control them through their needs. Montaigne was not a hermit. He loved conversation, friendship, social life, but he loved these things from a position of independence rather than dependence. He engaged with others because he chose to, not because he had to, and this choice made his relationships more genuine, his pleasures more intense, his life more fully his own. The things that fall into place when you stop caring include your relationship with yourself. You stop being your own harshest critic and become your own most interesting companion. You stop demanding that you be better, different, other than you are, and begin to enjoy who you actually are in this moment. This enjoyment is not complacency. It is the foundation from which genuine change becomes possible, because it is no longer driven by self-rejection, but by self-acceptance. The acceptance of contradiction. Human beings are contradictory. We want security and adventure, solitude and company, freedom and belonging. We hold beliefs that conflict, desires that cancel each other out, values that war within us. The modern response to this contradiction is to resolve it, to find the one true path, the authentic self, the coherent philosophy that makes sense of everything. Montaigne accepted the contradiction. He did not try to resolve it. He let it stand, let it breathe, let it be the texture of his thought rather than a problem to be solved. We are, I know not how, double within ourselves, he wrote, and this doubleness was not a flaw but a feature. It made him human. It made him real. The refusal to resolve contradiction is another form of nonchalance. When you stop caring about being consistent, you are free to hold multiple perspectives. You can be skeptical and hopeful, critical and appreciative, detached and engaged. You do not need to choose between these poles because you recognize that life is not a multiple-choice test. It is an essay question, and the best essays contain tension, ambiguity, unresolved energy. This acceptance extends to your understanding of the world. Montaigne was a skeptic in the ancient sense, not someone who denies knowledge, but someone who suspends judgment. He read widely, thought deeply, and concluded that certainty was usually a sign of limited perspective. The person who is certain has stopped thinking. The person who is comfortable with uncertainty continues to learn. When you stop caring about being right, you become capable of genuine dialogue. You can listen without preparing your rebuttal. You can change your mind without feeling defeated. You can hold your opinions lightly, as hypotheses rather than possessions. This lightness is the opposite of the heaviness that comes from caring too much about your own correctness. The things that fall into place when you accept contradiction are not neat and tidy. They are complex, layered, alive. Your relationships become more interesting because you are no longer trying to reduce the other person to a type or a role. Your work becomes more creative because you are no longer forcing it into a predetermined mold. Your life becomes richer because you have stopped editing out the parts that do not fit your narrative. The measure of a life. How do you know if you are living well? Montaigne's answer was deceptively simple. You feel it, not in the sense of constant pleasure, but in the sense of alignment between your life and your nature. You are not living well if you are constantly anxious, constantly performing, constantly caring about things that leave you empty. You are living well if you can say at the end of the day that you were present, that you were yourself, that you were not dominated by fear or desire. This measure is internal, not external. It cannot be verified by others. It does not appear on your resume or your social media profile. It is known only to you, in the quiet moments when the distractions fall away and you are left with the simple fact of your own existence. Montaigne called this living appropriately, not according to some universal standard, but according to the specific rhythm of your own being. The modern world offers endless external measures of success: wealth, status, followers, awards, appearances. These measures are not evil, but they are irrelevant to the question of whether you are living well. You can have all of them and be miserable. You can have none of them and be at peace. Montaigne's philosophy is an invitation to ignore these measures and attend to the only one that matters, your own experience of your own life. This attending is not self-indulgence, it is responsibility. You are the only person who can know whether your life fits you. You are the only person who can feel the subtle wrongness of a path that looks right to everyone else. And you are the only person who can make the adjustments that bring you into alignment with your own nature. When you stop caring about external measures, you begin to care about internal ones, not in the anxious, obsessive way that the modern self-help industry promotes, but in the gentle, ongoing way that Montaigne practiced. You check in with yourself. You notice what feels heavy and what feels light. You make small adjustments, day by day, toward a life that is more genuinely yours. The things that fall into place when you adopt this internal measure are not the things you were told to want. They are the things that actually fit you. The work that uses your specific talents. The relationships that match your specific needs. The pace of life that suits your specific temperament. None of this looks impressive from the outside, but it feels right from the inside. And for Montaigne, that feeling was the only reliable guide. The return to the ordinary. Montaigne's greatest gift to philosophy was his attention to the ordinary. He did not write about abstract ideals or transcendent truths. He wrote about sleeping, eating, dressing, traveling, conversing, aging, dying. He found wisdom in the most mundane experiences because he understood that life is made of these experiences and that the meaning of life is not found in extraordinary moments, but in the quality of attention we bring to ordinary ones. You have been trained to seek the extraordinary, the peak experience, the breakthrough moment, the transformative event that will change everything. This training is part of the tyranny of caring. It makes you dissatisfied with your actual life, always waiting for the real thing to begin, always deferring your attention to some imagined future. Montaigne would have found this tragic. The real thing is already happening, the coffee you are drinking, the light through the window, the conversation you are having or avoiding, the body you are inhabiting, with all its limitations and sensations. These are not preparations for life. They are life. And when you stop caring about the extraordinary, you discover that the ordinary is extraordinary enough. This discovery changes everything. It changes your relationship to time, which stops being something to optimize and becomes something to inhabit. It changes your relationship to others, who stop being means to your ends and become ends in themselves. It changes your relationship to yourself, which stops being a project to improve and becomes a presence to enjoy. The nonchalance that Montaigne practiced was not indifference to the ordinary, but a deep, attentive engagement with it. He noticed everything. He found the remarkable in the unremarkable. He was interested in his own boredom, his own discomfort, his own habits of mind. And in this interest, he found a richness that is invisible to those who are always looking elsewhere. When you stop caring about the extraordinary, the ordinary falls into place, not because it becomes something else, but because you finally see it for what it is. The only thing you have, the only thing you need, the field in which your life actually happens. The courage to be unremarkable. There is a particular terror in the modern condition. The terror of being unremarkable, of living a life that does not stand out, that does not get noticed, that does not accumulate likes or achievements or legacy. This terror drives much of our caring. We care intensely because we are afraid that if we stop, we will disappear. Montaigne faced this terror and chose the unremarkable. He could have been more famous, more powerful, more influential. He chose instead to write essays that were deliberately personal, deliberately modest, deliberately unconcerned with the grand philosophical questions that obsessed his contemporaries. He chose to be himself in all his limitation, rather than to perform a version of himself that might be remembered. This choice required courage. It is harder to be unremarkable than to be remarkable. The remarkable life is scripted, directed, produced. The unremarkable life is improvised, uncertain, vulnerable. It offers no protection against obscurity, no guarantee against being forgotten. It simply is, without the defense of significance. Montaigne found freedom in this vulnerability. When you stop trying to be remarkable, you stop performing. When you stop performing, you start living. The audience that you imagined watching your every move dissolves, and you are left with the simple fact of your own existence, which is enough if you let it be enough. The courage to be unremarkable is the courage to stop caring about your legacy, your reputation, your place in history. These things are not in your control, and your caring about them does not improve them. It only makes you anxious in the present and disappointed in the future. Montaigne accepted that he would be forgotten, that his essays might not survive, that his name might not last. And in this acceptance, he found the peace that eludes those who are always building monuments. The things that fall into place when you embrace the unremarkable are not dramatic. They are quiet, sustained, deeply satisfying. They do not announce themselves. They do not require validation. They simply are, and in their simple being, they constitute a life that is genuinely lived rather than performed. The fall into place. What does it mean for things to fall into place? Not that they become easy, not that they become predictable, not that they conform to your plans. Montaigne's life was full of difficulty, loss, illness, political turmoil. Things fell into place not because they became painless, but because he stopped resisting them. He stopped demanding that reality match his expectations. He stopped caring about the gap between what he wanted and what he had. This is the final and most complete form of nonchalance, the acceptance of what is. Not resignation, which is a form of caring about not caring, but genuine acceptance, which is the absence of the demand that things be otherwise. When you reach this acceptance, you discover that the things you were struggling to arrange were never really out of place. They were only out of place relative to your expectations. Remove the expectations, and everything is exactly where it should be. Montaigne's death was consistent with his life. He died at home, surrounded by friends, without drama or philosophical pronouncements. He had stopped caring about death long before it arrived. Not through denial, but through familiarity. He had thought about it, written about it, accepted it as part of the ordinary texture of existence. And because he was not afraid of it, he was free to live until it came. This is the promise of Montaigne's philosophy, though he would never have made promises. When you stop caring about the things that do not matter, you discover that the things that do matter have been there all along. They were hidden by your anxiety, obscured by your performance, drowned out by your desperate need for control. When the caring stops, they emerge. They fall into place, not because you arranged them, but because you stopped interfering with their natural arrangement. Tonight, when you lie down, you will have a choice tonight, as you have every night of your life. You can review the day with the anxious eye of someone who is always measuring, always comparing, always caring about whether things are going according to plan. Or you can review it with the gentle attention of someone who is simply here, who is simply alive, who is curious about what this day contained without needing it to contain anything specific. Montaigne would recommend the second approach, not because it produces better results, though it often does, but because it is the only approach that allows you to actually experience your life rather than constantly evaluating it. The evaluating mind is never present. It is always elsewhere, in the future or the past, in the comparison or the plan. The present mind is here, now, in the only moment that exists. When you stop caring about outcomes, you begin to care about experience, not in the anxious, grasping way of someone who is trying to accumulate memories or optimize pleasure, but in the open, receptive way of someone who is genuinely interested in what is happening, whatever it is. This interest is the opposite of boredom. It is the fullness of attention that makes every moment potentially rich. The things that fall into place when you adopt this attention are not the things you were trying to get. They are the things that were already possible, already present, already waiting for you to notice them. The friendship that deepens when you stop performing, the work that flows when you stop forcing, the peace that arrives when you stop demanding that life be something other than it is. Montaigne's essays are an invitation to this attention. They are not a system to follow or a method to apply. They are the record of one man's attempt to live without the heaviness of excessive care, to be light in a world that rewards weight, to be present in a culture that demands projection. They show us what is possible when we stop trying so hard to become something and simply allow ourselves to be. The last word. Montaigne did not believe in last words. He believed in ongoing conversation, in the essay as attempt rather than conclusion, in the self as process rather than product. So this is not a conclusion. It is an invitation to begin. Stop caring. Not about everything, not in the sense of giving up on life, but about the things that have been making you miserable, about the opinions that do not matter, about the outcomes you cannot control, about the version of yourself that exists only in other people's minds and in your own anxious projections. Care instead about your own experience, about the quality of your attention, about the lightness of your being, about the simple, extraordinary fact that you are here, now alive, in a world that does not require your management. When you do this, something happens. The things you were struggling to arrange begin to arrange themselves, not because you stopped trying, but because you stopped trying to force them into shapes they were never meant to take. You stopped caring about the wrong things, and in that release, the right things emerged. This is Montaigne's gift, not a philosophy of achievement, but a philosophy of being. Not a guide to success, but an invitation to presence. Not a method for getting what you want, but a practice of wanting what you have. Everything falls into place when you stop caring because everything was already in place. You were just too busy caring to notice.